They thought about outsourcing of mine operations. So why don't we get a big Australian contractor who does the mining in Australia and actually use them? Well, firstly, they'd lose significant profit and control of factors in which they had expertise and interest. So they had good, in terms of the PR and the local economy, in terms of they had some good environmental practice, etc. And they didn't want to lose that. And also, a contractor might, if you like, rape the mine of all the good coal for the term of their contract and leave no best practice legacy. So in other words, put in the best people, not train up the existing people, then just leave. Yep. And where were they? Yep. Bring in a mining firm on a consultancy basis was another one. But as the joke goes, those that do, and those that can't consult. I is one, so I should, no, hang on, step back from that. Essentially, if the contractor was a miner and they were used to running mines, they wouldn't have, why should they put in these people, yeah? When they could be much more profitably used on their mines where they had assets employed. So that wasn't seen as sort of viable, and they considered, knocked around other options. And with all those options, their thinking was, shouldn't actually be running a mine be part of our core capability? Yeah, rather than just outsourcing it to someone else. You know, this is what we do. So, chosen solution. Well, spend 140 million bucks on a new coal handling and processing plant. That was part of it, yeah, through an alliance structure. And bring in a company with a critical mass of people and their systems, yeah, so and their systems for 5 years. And at the end, leave their systems and a skilled up workforce who had a different mindset. So a culture change, not just in attitude, which was talked about, but also in skills and also in systems. So embedded in how they do things, yeah? Okay. And an alliance. Right, now this is where I got involved. Because I was over in New Zealand on a week's business, which sounds glamorous, but it's a week of jet lag followed by another week of jet lag. And I was met up with the guys, I was put in touch with the guys and we met up for a beer, as is the way in New Zealand. And we had a chat, and IREM wrote an email saying, oh, it seems to me that it's critical for X, Y and Z. And they said, oh yeah, on the nail there. And sent back the request for proposals which they'd sent out. And I looked at this and said, hang on, we had this discussion and now I've got this. And what they'd done is they got in an alliance facilitator for Capital Alliance and basically sort of shoehorned the arrangement they were looking at into this structure. And the feedback that I got from my contact, but from also other people was, from reading it, was, what are you actually asking us to do? Yeah, in this request for proposals. And the incentive mechanism was the classic capital alliance structure of a pay and gain mechanism. Yeah. The other thing was that in the request for proposals, this was their objectives. So they listed out these things, and that's what we're asking you to do. Yeah. Okay. And we talked about baselining. Well, they'd only based what's not in here. Oh yeah, operations. They baselined their operations apparently, and they said, we reckon and they listed them out. And where are you? Well, we're 3. Okay, what does 3 mean in practice? Well, we just think we're 3. Yeah. Okay, what criteria? So I said, well, would a minimum condition of satisfaction be a 5 then if you were bringing someone in? And they said, yeah, 5, 6. So okay. And what would be grain-breaking objection? On a scale of 0 to 10, which is the scale they were using, well, that would be sort of 9, but should we agree that at 10 we can't foresee, because relating to the previous speaker's point, best practice evolves, yeah? So I said, well, if I was contracting on this, I'd want a bit more detail, yeah? What do you actually mean by this? So what we did, well, in agreement, what we did is we said, we need to get clear on what these objectives mean in practice before final selection, so you know if the people can actually deliver it, yeah? And before you start negotiation with your partner. And the phrase I use was used, if you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for something, you'll fall for anything. Yeah? And they all went, ooh, crikey, yes. At the moment, the three Alliance leadership team people at board level all had different objectives, and they're all being big picture people. Big, vague and waffly, yeah? Okay, which from the legal perspective, if you're going to work together for 5 years to achieve an objective, you want to have it pretty damn nailed what you're going to get paid for, yeah? And have developed their ideas about a workable fit-for-purpose incentive arrangement versus a capital alliance structure, okay? So what we did was we ran a workshop with the three senior Solid Energy Alliance leadership team people. So if these were director level, the CEO, the director of risk and strategy, and the senior operations director, involving some of the senior, the future Alliance management team. So these would be the Solid Energy people. And we devoted a day to understanding the linkage between these objectives, agreeing what game breaking performance was, if that was 9 plus, what minimum condition of satisfaction was, the 5 out of 10 was, and meant for each of these parameters on a developmental scale. And what I mean by developmental scale is in terms of trying to say, well, if you add a 5 and you want to be at a 6, you can't get to 6 unless 5 is embedded, yeah? So it's like a ladder. You can't get onto the next rung unless you're on the previous rung, and so on and so on, yeah? We also looked at the weighting of importance of these. So what's the real strong emphasis on? What's a nice to have, if you like? Yeah. So, and establishing further actions. So I didn't, as someone coming in, I didn't see the linkages between these different objectives. I said, well, here's the business excellence model, something which is some of you might be familiar with, some of you might not. Essentially, over here are enablers, and the more over here, the more their front-end stuff. And then you go across here, and they translate into results. And key performance results generally tend to be the financials, not all the time. But to deliver those, you've got to have happy people working for you, happy customers, and happy society, because you don't exist in a vacuum. And I said, well, where all those areas that you mentioned in your as some conditions of satisfaction and groundbreaking, where do they sit on this model? And they put them there. And that was because there didn't seem to be linkage between them. Therefore, there was a danger that they double counted the objectives. Yeah. So they put them there. Right. Well, that was fairly simple. Had a discussion around that. Yeah. Got clear that one led on to the other, and so on. We then said, right, get clear about the objectives. So this is the one for people, which we developed, and that was the first one we developed. But the point I'm making here is, if you look at that, and this was further work, this was a first draft, and a generic action was hand this out to the management team to further develop and nail, not absolutely, but so that you can go into discussion with the partner you choose, and then the way I can refine it, yeah? And it will provide, at the very least, a strategic framework for development, yeah? Rather than being vague and wishy-washy. So again, going back to it, get specific about the benefits, the critical success criteria, if you like, which can translate into KPIs for your project. All right? So if you compare that in terms of specificity with that for people, yeah? Can you see that there is a little bit more detail? Yeah? Just a little bit, yeah? And the idea is, going back one, whoops, where am I? Going back one, is that at the time was, essentially, if for each going up a level, they would be rewarded for going up a level. Yep, so they would get a lump when they have reached and embedded a level, they would then get paid an incentive. The Alliance management team, which would be a jointly made up of the contractor and the Solid Energy people, would prepare the case and say we are at this level, and it would be approved by consensus by the Alliance leadership team, which would consist of 3 people from Solid Energy and 3 people from the contractors. So again, very consensual. No party can override the other one. That was the intention at the time that we were doing the workshop. Right. Okay. Net present value was an interesting one. because that's how they judge their long-term success criteria. The two big, what I found interesting was as it developed, as we discussed these, things came out which weren't in that request for proposals. So the two big drivers were the large environmental liabilities, which I mentioned, because they just weren't being done. And if Google Maps had worked, you could see that when we sort of viewed half of South Island, you could see a big scar of the island where the mine was. So obviously they weren't remediating it and returning it to a national park. And the importance of extending the mine life, which meant big changes in culture and process for how the mine operated. And I found this interesting, the key operational driver was actually to just meet the customer's spec on time, every time, while using the worst possible quality of coal. Yeah? So in an era of best quality and raising expectation, the CEO was quite adamant that they wanted it to the spec, that's what we got delivered. We didn't get paid any more for delivering better quality, but if as they were doing, they were constantly over-giving the quality because they were just grabbing the best one, to get it out. It was actually, that was it. And that meant good planning, good intelligence on the coal. And they weren't doing that at the time. We then weighted those objectives. So we started with by saying, well, which is the least important, gave that a score of 10, then said which is the next important, and how important is that relative to that, and went up and then normalised those. Again, discussion around those among the senior executives. They hadn't had those discussions. And that obviously affects, when you're setting up an incentive mechanism, the weighting from the client's perspective that is put on them. Yeah?